Now, joining us again is our Washington Bureau Chief Emily Buck, as well as host of Real Ag Radio, Shaun Haney, for further perspective from across the border here in North America. Appreciate you guys joining us. Shaun, let's start with you. What is it that Canadians are most focused on right now in this post-election?
Well, Tammy, similar to most Americans, watching to see who the winner is. And quite frankly, fingers crossed that we can have this election decided and finalized as quickly as possible. You know, the worst case scenario is this is something that drags out for a period of days, possibly even weeks. Worst case scenario, maybe even in the courts that would go into the months. You know, as Canada being the largest trading partner of the U.S., it's very much in our economic interests for this election to be sorted out as quickly as possible. And quite frankly, a lot of Canadians following what's happening in some of those state races. For me in Alberta, I look at Montana very closely. If you're in Manitoba, you're following North Dakota. Same in Ontario with Ohio and Michigan. So Canadian news last night was all U.S. election. I'm not sure anything else was going on yesterday.
Very interesting. Emily, you want to weigh in on any of that?
Absolutely, Tammy. I think, Shaun's got a great perspective from Canada, but here in the U.S., something that we're really focusing in on is what's going to happen with the House Ag Committee now that Chairman Collin Peterson has lost his election to Republican Michelle Fischbach. And I really think there's a couple things to focus in on there. Number one is what's going to happen with cattle marketing and transparency. In the wake of COVID-19 and packing plant shutdowns, that's been a key issue that farmers and ranchers want a solution on. And there are multiple pieces of legislation in the House Ag Committee right now for consideration that farmers want to vote on before the Farm Bill. So I think it becomes a question of will we be able to see some movement on those, or will those get stuck? Now, Chairman Peterson has also been very vocal about putting into place safeguards in the event of another pandemic. For example, if we see African swine fever in the United States or a hoof and mouth outbreak. So we'll have to be watching to see if that work will continue or if another chairman will go in a different direction. And that brings me to my third point. Who will be chairman? Right now, it's looking like Democrats are going to control the House. That's not for sure yet, but that's what we're seeing. If that's the case, then Democrats will maintain the chairmanship of the committee, and it will likely be either David Scott from Georgia or Jim Costa from California taking the helm.
All right, thank you, Emily. Shaun, let's go back to something you mentioned earlier in your first answer. The critical trade between the U.S. and Canada. In your eyes and what goes on in Canada, just how valuable is that trade partnership?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. I want to follow up on Emily's comment about Collin Peterson. Last night, I was on a broadcast, and one of the panelists was Tyson Redpath of the Russell Group, and he said that, you know, when you look at agriculture, the loss of Collin Peterson may have more impact on ag policy going forward than necessarily who even the president of the United States would be. So I thought that was, you know, that sort of talks about the gravity of the situation with Collin Peterson losing. So in terms of trade, very, very critical. And of course, we just implemented the USMCA. A lot of the text hasn't even really kind of been engaged and put in place yet, specifically in the auto sector. For agriculture, all eyes is really on what happens with dairy. There was some battling over the TRQs on U.S. dairy exports into Canada. The U.S. watching very, very closely. Will Canada be up to some old tricks and try to, wiggle out of some of the commitments that they made? There's honestly, on this side of the border, there's no indications that Canada is looking to do so. I think even more critical for the Canadian dairy sector is the fact that the Class 7 system was eradicated. Really, what puts a limit on Canadian skim milk exports going forward. So trade just so critical in all of the ag commodities. The supply chain so integrated. It's, like I said, really in Canada's best interest that there is a very quick resolve and completion to this U.S. election that could drag out for the rest of the week.
Yeah, it could be going on for at least a few weeks. All right, Shaun, any questions you might have for Emily while we've got her?
Yeah, if you look at the Senate races from last night, which ones were you following the closest? I was kind of watching what was going on with Lindsey Graham. Is there a chance that he could be upset there? He was really being out-financed for sure, but he came away the victor. What Senate races were you following closely?
Well, Sean, there were 7 Senate Ag Committee members up for re-election here. So I was keeping my eye on all 7 of those, but a few of those really rose to the top because they were toss-up elections going into it. And we didn't really know how they were going to turn out. I think the first and foremost was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell versus Amy McGrath. You mentioned Lindsey Graham's election. The McConnell election was actually the second most expensive in the nation. So this is another one where Democrats were really targeting to flip that. Most people know him as the Senate Majority Leader, but he's also on the House Ag Committee and comes from Kentucky, which is a key ag state. So that was a key one there. Also, Senator Joni Ernst versus Teresa Greenfield in Iowa. Renewable fuels and ethanol has been a key talking point for not only the Senate race there, but also in the presidential elections, with Biden making it a point to emphasize green energy production, which requires ethanol and biofuels and also biomanufacturing. So that was a key one there. And then the third one I was really keeping my eye out for was the Senate Kansas race. So Pat Roberts, the incumbent there, he's currently the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. We knew he was retiring, so it's not a surprise that we're going to lose him as chairman. But taking his place will be current Representative Roger Marshall, who currently represents the big 1st District of Kansas. He edged out Dr. Barbara Bollier, and so he is looking to take Pat Roberts' seat on the Senate Ag Committee. So that'll be an important development in that committee as well.
Definitely. Sean, let's talk about what's next. What do we look for moving forward?
Well, I think today I'm watching very closely. Is there a path for Biden to win that doesn't have to go through Pennsylvania? Of course, the way that Pennsylvania is counting these ballots and the process, if it all ends up in Pennsylvania, this turns into a really ugly mess very, very quickly. So can Biden win in Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, and could he pull out the huge upset in Georgia, which it would be absolutely amazing to a lot of people? I think that would actually be just as amazing as a 4% win that President Trump had in Florida. So I think that's what in the next 24 hours, everyone watching so closely as these votes start to roll in is, do we have to depend on Pennsylvania for the outcome for Biden or Trump, or are there other paths for a conclusion to this?
Right. Thank you, Sean. So interesting to see how closely the Canadians do follow what we do. Emily, before we let you go, what are you looking forward to? Or how will you spend the next few days, and how will you focus your time and effort?
So one of the key areas that I'm still watching closely is the California House races. Those results are still rolling in. California is our top ag producing state. And what's really critical about California is that, typically led by Democrats, they tend to guide the conversation around regulatory reform. You frequently see the court systems in California cracking down on traditional agriculture and looking to make reforms in environmental aspects in agriculture. So the outcomes of those races really do matter. I'm actually going to be talking a little bit more about some of the House Ag Committee members from California and their races in our next half hour. So stay tuned there. And I can just tell you, too, we're going to make it a priority here in Washington to be reaching out to some of these new members on the Senate and House Ag Committee to see, what are their policy goals moving forward.
Coverage you won't get anywhere else on the agricultural angle of this presidential race and the other races across our country. Appreciate you, Emily Buck, our Washington Bureau Chief for RFD TV and host of Real Ag Radio, Shaun Haney, there in Canada. Appreciate you guys so much and your input.